Welcome to the first episode of Season 2 of Climbing Mount CMMC. And today, Bobby is joined by Shel Phillips and Brian Hubbard. Shel and Brian both have over 40 years of cybersecurity experience with many certifications under their belts. Today, Bobby, Shel, and Brian are going to go through an actual RFP and how to break it down. We're so excited for you guys to join us in today's podcast, and we hope that you enjoy.
I want to talk to you. Let's just dive right into some of the meat and potatoes. And how do you guys see kind of this game of chicken that's happening with the DIB space? A lot of the contractors are kind of waiting to the last second to veer. What does that look like, and what are the dangers in that?
It's like veering a battleship. You can't just cut at the last second. It's going to take miles to prepare.
Right.
And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're facing right now as far as this whole compliance to CMMC and the new Rule 2.1.
So, Brian, for you, you're starting to see more involvement with pre-assessments that I'm sure are happening. How do you feel the ecosystem, if you have your finger on the pulse, perhaps, of like how are organizations, are they starting to turn the ship and starting to implement those controls, or are they still heading straight for the iceberg as much?
Yeah, I mean, they're starting to. I mean, there's an upswing definitely in the number of companies that are starting to pay attention and moving out on it. I think one of the dangers is that people aren't thinking that, well, I already have this requirement in my contract. And in most cases, they already have contracts that have these requirements in them, and they're just now starting to comply. Yet they've already signed up that they're meeting all these requirements.
Right.
So yeah. I think that's a real danger for them from a contract risk perspective.
Well, I think the DoD as well as the federal government has made sure that everybody starts to understand it's not business as usual. Like the proposed rule that came out clearly drew the line in the sand, and they're not veering. They're serious about making this commitment, and organizations are either going to be early or they're going to be late to the bowl, right? And this kind of moves me to the next question, and that is, like, what kind of requirements and expectations would you see, Shel, because, as an organization that is helping people prepare, what kind of requirements or expectations would you think that should be transparent and shared between the organization you're supporting that does have those in their contracts, as well as the IT company, the MSP or MSSP, or however you want to look at it? Like, how does that work? And that they're helping them, and how do they need to communicate those requirements that they have that are flowing down to, the OSC, the contract?
That's a great question, Bobby. Historically, there has not been a lot of communication. They basically just say, make me secure, and we'll take care of sort of reporting and that sort of thing. But I'm finding with new requirements that MSPs, number one, are going to have to be certified.
Right.
And therefore, we need to get our act together as we perform these things. And one of the things that I've found and I've switched to is asking them to share the cybersecurity requirements in their RFPs or their contracts, so I can have a better understanding of exactly what they're trying to comply to. One of the things I'm doing nowadays is working on the East Coast with a mentee who's trying to break into the business, and we're starting with level 1 clients. And so the question is, how do you tell the difference between level 1 and level 2? And so I've actually sort of been teaching him how to look at contract portions under NDA and figure out exactly how to determine whether this is a level 1 or level 2 client. So the point is that we need to start asking questions, real questions, and get real answers based on their true experience. Historically, they've just said, oh, we do our SPURS reports and we're fine. Okay.
Well, it seemed like in the past, kind of the thought was, we'll put the requirement on the OSC or the organization that's getting that contract, and then they'll just tell the people that they need to tell us, right, MSP, that they've got to be doing these types of things. And I think clearly with the proposed rule and how things are going, that's not the case anymore. They're expecting us to get parity and certification with them. So now we're going to have to get level 2. We have to meet with them shoulder to shoulder. Brian, for that situation, what type of things as an auditor having your auditor hat on, what are you going to be looking at to see that the MSP and the OSC, as they're getting audited together, what are you going to look for to see that they're understanding the contract requirements and how they're meeting each other in the middle?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is to understand how the MSP is engaging, right? So, are they doing staff aug? Basically staff, coming in as a member of the OSC's team, and they're just working on the OSC's equipment and that sort of thing. But the information's never going to their environment. If that's the case, then they're not considered an external service provider by the DoD, right? They're just part of the team. Mm-hmm. So understanding whether they're doing that or whether they're actually processing, storing, or transmitting CUI through their equipment, or whether they're just storing, processing, or transmitting security protection data through their own environment is the important first step to understand how they need to be engaged and what they need to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the auditor's going to be looking for that, and both parties, the OSC and the MSP or the external service provider, they need to understand those rules of engagement, because that's what they're going to be measured against, right? Ignorance is not bliss in that category.
Exactly. It's really part of the scoping exercise at the beginning.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, Shel, you've had experience in that. I was hoping that maybe you might kind of walk us through your experience in looking at RFPs that have come in, and what kind of requirements, because as you kind of read through this, you'll start to notice that it's not purely, hey, are you doing 800.171A? There's more to it than that. And so let's just kind of walk through that, Shel. Okay. Can you kind of get us up to speed on what you're about to discuss with us, so everybody's on the same page?
Let's do it this way. I'll read. I did an analysis on an RFP for one of my clients recently, and I looked at the whole contract. They actually wanted me to answer the questions, yes or no, and so on, for the cybersecurity section. So I went through and I actually pulled out all the pieces that applied to them and what they needed to comply with. And what I thought might be interesting is as Brian, as the assessor, from his standpoint, if I read the question and sort of the response, he can sort of explain what's covered, and why it's important. And I will start by saying this contract was a number of pages long, and it started out with 4 pages of flow downs. Brian, can you explain what a flow down is?
Sure. So when a prime contractor receives a contract, right, there's a certain number of clauses that are in the contract that are the FAR clauses, or the defense defense supplement to the FAR, which is the DFARS clauses in that contract, and many of those have to be flowed down all the way through the contract. So what that means is that any subcontract that they issue has to have those clauses in it. And the subcontractor.
Let me ask you. I've heard this misnomer, and I'm like, I don't think this is right, but I want to put you on the spot here. Sure. I've heard people say, "Oh, it's just a few. Like there's some magic number where it stops flowing down." Can you elaborate?
There is no magic numbers. What it is,
there's no magic number.
So the prime contractor has to review the clauses and understand whether they have to be flowed down or not. They can choose to flow down everything, or they can choose to flow down only those things that have to be flowed down. But it's not an option for them to, let's say if they have the DFARS 7012 clause, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but if they have that clause in their contract, it's a flow down. It doesn't matter. They have no choice. If they don't float down their subcontractors, they're actually in violation of their own contract. And then even subsequent. So if you're a third tier, fourth tier, fifth tier sub, all that clause has to flow down all the way to the lowest level subcontractor.
Yeah, I suspect it's probably a cut and paste, don't you think, Brian?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. So here's an example of the flow downs. It just started at the top of the list. 52.202-1, definitions. 52.203-3, gratuities. 52.203-5, covenant against contingent fees, and on and on and on for 4 pages. And it's small print. It's like 10-point print.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds of them.
Checklist. It'll just be a checklist. Here are all the clauses that are flowing down to you. Just be this
Right.
page, 2 pages, 3 pages of just purely a checklist of clauses.
Yep.
Should you trust, Shel, that your client knows to look for those types of things?
As a consultant myself, I have to suggest to them, hey, maybe you better look at this,
A little bit closer, right?
and have a good look at what they are. I mean, a lot of them are obvious. I mean, the definitions, yeah, it's going to be pages and pages of definitions. And gratuities, it's going to be a couple paragraphs about, okay, you can't take gratuities to get an advantage, that sort of thing. So the titles kind of suggest what they are. But there are some that actually go into the details of cybersecurity and that sort of thing. And you have to be sure that you don't miss any of those. You have to actually be aware. And I think after you've gone through one of those as a client, you probably then begin to know what to recognize when you look at the next one and the next one and the next one. So let's go back to this contract and actually look at some of the language in it. And on page 3 of this, this was like a 15-page RFP. Actually, a request for quote. It was very simplistic, and the product design specifications were in a separate document. So it didn't even actually have the pages and pages of product definition. It was referring to other documents. And they had the title and what to look for. But here's the compliance section. First question, does the information systems network, which will be utilized by your company in performance of any work concerning the solicitation, comply with the requirements of FAR 52.204-21, basic safeguarding of covered contractor information systems? Okay, so that's the very first question. What are we talking about there? What's FAR 52.204-21, Brian?
Well, so first the FAR, right? The FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So
right.
That is the big umbrella, right? That's every executive level agency. So whether it be Health and Human Services, DOD, the IRS, whoever's issuing a contract, they use the FAR. The FAR is actually what they have to use. It's not an option for them either. So,
right.
And there are certain clauses that are showing up in every contract. They have to. They're required to include the acquisition of professionals are required to include certain clauses. This clause 52.204-21 is one of them. It's just basic safeguarding of information. So the government wants their data protected, right? And this is, I would say, the bare minimum that they could do and not cause a whole upheaval in the community. And basically what they did was they picked 15 high-level controls that they felt were just the basic security controls that everybody should abide by. Quite frankly, it's not enough. There's 15, but that doesn't cover a lot of areas. But this equates, if we're on CMMC, this equates to CMMC level 1. 1-for-1 match. There's 15 controls in 52.204-21. There's 17 controls in level 1 of CMMC, but those 17 controls map exactly to the 15 controls.
Right. So that's the starting place. Your federal contract information has to comply to those 15 level 1. So that's where they start. Okay, right. Question 2.
Well, hold on before you hit that though. If you haven't checked out Jacob Horn's recent reference to the movement in the FAR rule that's coming out very soon, they're now starting to see where there's going to be finally the ruling is going to come out where it's going to say, okay, here's FAR's approach to CUI. The DOD has already published theirs, but now the FAR is going to release theirs. What that looks like, no one's 100% sure how that's going to play out. Right. But you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be pretty large in scope because you're talking, right, all of the organizations that fall under FAR, basically the whole government that is going to be doing acquisitions of something is going to go through that FAR. So,
the thing that's important too, Bobby, is that the FAR this clause, 204-21, it applies to every federal contract. It doesn't matter whether you're processing CUI or not. You have this requirement, even if it's just federal contract information. In other words, just the normal stuff you get as part of your contract, it has to be protected according to these controls.
Okay, so that's a good call out, Bobby. I suspect, and I do a lot of CGIS work as well, that it'll push down to state and local governments as well. I think it's just everybody's going to be under the same sort of vertical.
Well, if you look as an MSP, like I go to conferences, I ask this question a lot. It's like, how many of your clients fall under the CMMC requirement? And like, typically it's like maybe 1%, 2%. But as the FAR rule and some of those other things, you're going to see that percentage go to increase over time.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Has your company implemented the requirements of DFARS 252.204-7012, Safeguarding Covered Defense Information and Cyber Incident Reporting for the information systems networks that will be utilized by your company in performance of any work concerning this solicitation? DFAR, what's the difference between a FAR and a DFAR?
Good one.
There's a D and an S. It's
good one.
Well, the DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations Supplement. So and again, it's just an agency specific additional set of regulations or requirements that the DoD has determined that they want specific to their contracts. So that's the DFARS. There's similar for other agencies. There's other FAR supplements as well for other agencies, not just defense. And DFARS 7012 is really the DoD's first attempt to have their contractor well, not their first attempt really, but it's the first formalized attempt to try to implement the NIST standards in order to protect controlled unclassified information. So one of the biggest thing in it is that the requirement to comply with NIST 800-171, right, the 110 controls. But there are other requirements, right? There's reporting of incident requirement to the Defense Cybercrime Center. There's requirements if you have CUI in a cloud environment that are a part of the DFARS 7012 clause. And there's a few others that are important. So 800-171 compliance is the big kahuna, but there's these other requirements that are critically important to protecting the DIB and the defense what's industry.
So interesting is that's going to the some of those rules are going to be rewritten to some extent, right? Or updated, I guess is the right way to say that after the proposed rule becomes final and more of that stuff is going to happen
now.
Yeah, right. We just don't know what exactly is going to have in them. Yeah. So, but I mean, it's not going to be, oh, we decided we're not going to do this. They're just adding on to what's already been expected.
Exactly.
Okay, so then we get into, on page 12 of this RFP, we get into sort of the detailed questions. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? So on and so forth. And the first question is, are your company information systems compliant with the requirements of FAR 52204-21, basic safeguarding of covered contractor information systems? Note, to be compliant, the 17 NIST FAR controls have to be fully implemented. The requirements cannot be met with a plan of action and milestones. What's a POAM? Oh my goodness.
So a plan of action and milestones is really the set of projects that you have ongoing in order to get compliant. I mean, that's what we're talking about here in that question you just asked. So what that means is there's some control that hasn't been fully implemented in the company, and what they do is they document that and write out a plan of action of how they're going to fix it, how they're going to become fully compliant, and some time frames associated with that. So it's not enough to just say I'm going to do it. You have to actually say here's how I'm going to do it, here's how I'm allocating resources, and here's what I'm going to be done by. So when you're going into an assessment, you cannot have any of those that are purely for compliance sake. So, for example, if I'm not implementing access control, I can't put that on POAM and say, okay, now evaluate me against these 17 clauses. But I have a POAM for 5 of them. No, it's a non-starter.
So while we're talking about POAMs, how long does the client have to clear a POAM item?
Well, so until they're assessed, they have as much time as they want to take before their formal assessment.
Sure.
So when we're talking about assessments under CMMC or a formal DIBCAC assessment under 800-171, they will have 18 months to clear those. So if going into the assessment, they should have none, right? As a result of the assessment, the assessor may discover, well, you're not quite implementing that the way it's intended. So that would result in a POAM coming out of that assessment. And then there's 18 months to clear those. Now, under the DIBCAC 800-171 assessments, there's no real restriction on what can be POAM'd or how many things can be POAM'd. Under the CMMC proposed rule, there are very tight restrictions on what actually can show up on a POAM.
That was such a deviation from, before it was, I would say, reasonable. And then it was kind of almost like the DoD just kind of took their toys and left and said, look,
well,
there's only certain ones you can POAM. The time frame that you can do it is considerably shorter. Wow.
Yeah, it seems like a new thing to a lot of people, but it's really not. It's what the DoD has been talking about since the inception of CMMC, and it actually was embodied in the CMMC assessment process, which was geared towards C3PIOs and assessors. It's always been actually spelled out exactly the way it is in the proposed rule. It's still a little bit of an overreach, but it's so it's not new to the assessment community. It's kind of just now public.
Right.
what it is.
Okay, so moving along, the next question talks about it's number 2, and it just identifies 7012 as being sort of the umbrella for the next question. And part A, has your company implemented all 110 controls of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171 on your relevant information systems? Now, before you answer or explain that in detail, does that suggest, what level, let me ask it this way, what level of compliance does that suggest to you?
For CMMC, it's level 2.
Yep.
And for 800-171, it's just compliance. For DFARS 7012, it's just complying. And the key thing is that all 110 controls have to be implemented, right? And they have to be you have to be meeting those. So basically, it says you have to have a perfect score in order to. And in CMMC parlance, that means to be completely fully certified, you have to be perfect. It's not okay. You can't be 109. Right. You have to be 110 to be fully certified.
So let me ask you this question, Brian. In your observation, how many companies that have submitted their supplier performance risk system score, their SPURS score, how many of them have said, I have a 110 score and they also have a POAM? How many have you run into?
A large percentage.
And what does that suggest?
Didn't know to create a POAM and submitted a 110 score.
And what does that suggest to you? Yeah, well, they're lying.
Well, some, yes. I would say some are definitely just shading the truth. Others don't understand the requirements. See, what the problem with the way 800-171 is written currently in revision 2 is it's these high-level English language statements. And if somebody isn't paying attention to what you really have to do from an assessment perspective, they just look at those English language statements and it says something like, authorized users are identified. Oh, yeah, we do that. Well, there's a whole boatload of assessment objectives that have to be met. And if you don't look at those assessment objectives, you're not going to get it. So you may think you're 110, and an assessor comes in and says, you're really negative 203. Right? Because you can go negative in your score. That's not a situation you want to have.
Okay.
Now, one thing I would ask, I want y'all's opinion about this is when you are in a situation, I call it marriage counseling for CMMC, and it's like, let's just say that you're the managed service provider and your client turns to you and says, "Hey, how are we on this?" And they use the word "we" because they want to know how are you as their MSP or MSSP, and as you're filling it out, like, where are we together in lockstep on that? Is that a good place to be? In your opinion, I'm just curious.
As an MSP, that one of the very first documents I produce is a shared responsibility matrix. In other words, I spell out exactly, and I do it actually to the assessment objectives. Every assessment objective, who's going to develop the list of users, who's going to monitor, who's going to, so on and so forth. And I go down all 320 of the CMMC objectives and actually identify, is it me, you, vendor, or both, or three, or whatever. And I make notes about that. Who's going to do what? For example, when you go to patching, whose responsibility is it for patching? It's not just mine. You have to turn your machine on when it's time to patch, right? So the client has responsibility as well as the MSP or the vendor or whomever. And so you have to really identify that, and you start there. That's the very first document almost that I put together. And I say, okay, going into this, here's how it lays out, and here's who's going to take responsibility for what. So there's no question.
It warms my heart, brother. Yeah, It is. We have to be on the hill, and be ready to help them know, because if we need to be the North Star for them as far as in where they're navigating to, right? Because if we're moving at the same time they're trying to move, good Lord, I couldn't even imagine how you might be able to pull that off.
It's crazy.
That would be a nightmare. So that implies that we need to be first, that we're going to need to get our level 2 at least, so that as we're assisting our clients, and you don't want to be working out kind of that matrix like you're saying, Shel, while they're trying to bid on an RFP about where our lines of divisions happen and whose job is doing what. That would scare me to death if I was an organization and I was having that discussion while I'm about to bid on a job with my managed service provider. That just seems madness. And I know it's happening right now as we're recording this. People are probably doing that. And I just think that's absolutely nuts. Just crazy.
Yeah, that's the challenge for this year for Covenant, is to get certified and get our complete act together so we don't have to worry about that, and so that we can define very clearly who does what to whom and how and why. So, okay, next question. Has your company implemented all 31 basic security requirement controls of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-171? 31, that's a new number. What's that mean there, Brian?
So that's an interesting one to put in there. I've never seen that show up in that particular way. So the basic security requirement controls are just, I don't want to say arbitrary, but the way the NIST developed the 800-171, there's certain security controls that were called basic, and then there were other controls that were called derived. It's again, I feel it's fairly arbitrary, and actually in Rev 3, the proposed Rev 3, and what we're seeing in what's going to happen in the spring here, that distinction goes away in the NIST document itself. But so basically what it's saying is there's 31 controls that were considered basic, and those were derived from one of the FIPS publications. The FIPS, I'm going to get this wrong. FIPS 200 or the FIPS 199. I can't remember which one. It's neither here nor there. It doesn't matter. But anyway, there are 31 basic, and then the other 70 or 69 are derived. But it all equates back to controls that were in another NIST publication, NIST 800-53. And the distinction is neither here nor there, really. So it's surprising that the contract actually called those out.
actually calls it out. I had to do some digging to sort of figure out what the 31 were, but it's
Yeah,
out there.
yeah.
It's on the web. Okay, I'm going to skip a couple of these. Here's another question. Does your company currently hold a medium level of assurance, an
Oh, that's a good one.
MLOA certificate, to access DibNet
That
portal?
does not make a lot of sense about how that's written. It does not. What it is not what it sounds like, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm curious to see what you guys think.
Yeah, what are they talking about, Brian?
Well, so DibNet, DibNet is where incidents will get reported under DFARS 7012. Dibnet.dod.mil is the website. And if you go up there and you click on the button to report an incident, it'll prompt you for a medium assurance certificate. What that is it's a PKI cert, right? And it's you have to, and a medium level of assurance is the assurance of the certificate. So when you sign up for one, you have to send certain proofs of identity. It's individually based, by the way. It's not company based. So you have to prove your identity. Your identity is investigated and verified. You have to send documents that you really want to get back in order to get that certified.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get that certificate, and you once you have it, then you can actually log in and report incidents. So you have 72 hours under DFARS 7012 to report an incident. So you don't want to on day one that you discover the incident, you don't want to request a certificate because it takes weeks and weeks to get a certificate.
Yeah, it takes a couple of weeks to get that.
And
Let me find out you don't have it when you're doing your readiness for your assessment, that you don't have it either.
Let me ask you this, Brian.
So,
Now that's computer specific. It's a cert that's on a specific computer. What happens if that computer fails? Can you transfer that certificate, or do you have to go through the process?
That's a great question. So it's been a while since I actually had one myself. But when I did, I had it on a thumb drive. The cert actually on a thumb drive as a backup.
Okay.
So it's typically embedded in your browser, but you can also have it on the thumb drive, and so if you had to take it to another machine, it's transportable.
Yeah, you have to go through a process.
Yep.
I'm going through that right now. It's not fun because I got a new machine.
Yeah, it's a pain.
But when I first heard it, I thought, I don't know about you. I'm just being honest here. I thought, is this like cyber insurance? Is that what they're talking about with their media insurance certificate? And nope. When I first heard it, I was like, is that what that is? I don't know. What did you think, Shel, when you first heard it? Did you think it was what it really ended up being?
I didn't know about it, so I had to look it up and do some research.
Right.
No, what is this? I actually learned about it in my CCP class, to be honest. Yeah, they talked about it there.
Yeah. So, if you go to dibnet.dod.mil, it'll give you instructions on how to get a certificate.
Yep. Good. Okay, we just have one more paragraph that we want to address. So this question says, is your company assessing security requirements compliant with the requirements of DFARS 252.204-7019 and 7020? And it talks about the name. Compliance requires the usage of the DoD assessment methodology with submitted results scores to the Department of Defense website supplier performance rating system. So what is 7019 and 7020?
All right. Well, so these are the two DFARS clauses that were actually added back in 2020. Am I getting my numbers right?
I think that's about right.
Mm-hmm.
That actually provided teeth to DFARS 7012, because under DFARS 7012 you could self-attest, and all you had to do was basically tell your contracting officer, yeah, we're compliant, we're good. Well, DFARS 7019 says, oh, by the way, you have to do a self-assessment. If you do a self-assessment, you have to do it against a DoD assessment methodology. And based on that assessment methodology, you produce a score. And then you have to post that score in the Supplier Performance Risk System, SPRS. So it's basically you're now putting it, it's not just that you're doing a hand wave. Now you're actually putting a number out there. And not only you're putting a number out there, but if your number is not 110, you have to put up there, oh, by the way, I will complete all those others, to make myself 110 by a certain date, and you have to commit to it. So if you ever got audited by the Department of Defense after posting that, and they found out that, well, you said you were going to be compliant in July, and here we are in July of the following year, and you're still not doing it, they could find you in default of your contract.
Mm-hmm.
And nail you.
While we're talking about that, Brian, let's talk quickly about the False Claims Act of 1863. What is that?
I love the fact that you actually had the date in there. 1863.
Yeah.
That's great. Go ahead.
So basically what the False Claims Act is it's the government's way of saying, you're signing this contract and it has all these requirements in it, the FAR and the DFARS and all this other stuff. And if you're not doing things in accordance with those regulations, and you're basically lying to the government that you are complying, the government can come back and hit you with this False Claims Act. And what that says is they can take the contract away from you, and the other piece is that they can actually sue you for damages or anything else like that.
Treble damages?
Yes, that's what it's called. The lawyer in me didn't know that.
But the interesting thing that is that they weaponize, I guess for lack of a better word, your staff to help kind of keep you honest, because they get a portion of that when they report if it gets approved, right?
For the whistleblower.
Yeah,
right?
The whistleblowers.
Yeah. So, and the Department of Justice has been funded by Congress to enforce it. So there is a significant uptick in DOJ actions against, certainly with respect to cybersecurity in recent years, because now the Congress has said, DOJ, we're plussing you up to go after this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's reasonable to assume that you're going to see a lot more of those happen, especially once the certifications start dropping, because they want to know the integrity of those. And if you're not adhering to it, I can't imagine them turning a blind eye to that, especially if people are bringing forward evidence that you that organizations have turned to their employees and said, hey, I know that you object to this, but let's just get it done. Okay. We got to get this contract. So I know that you're not happy with this, but we're just going to say it's okay. And if that employee turns around and goes, I'm not cool with that, and reports you.
Yeah. And I think you're going to see a lot more whistleblowing happening because of the consequences of to CISOs of their companies not actually following their guidance and them not doing anything about it. CISOs are being called into court now and being sued, right? And so there's several examples of that recently.
And traditionally it's been larger companies, but I think that trend is going to change because they're going to want to make some examples of the SMB community as well. What that looks like, who knows? But
just as a funny aside, do you guys know the history of the False Claims Act?
For my CCP course, they did cover it because I took mine through Edwards, and they did a great job in training us on it.
It was called the Lincoln Act, and it was implemented because the Union soldiers were getting faulty equipment and provisions, horse meat and so on, and they wanted to stop that. So they signed, Abraham Lincoln signed the False Claims Act into law so that they could start getting better supplies. But just a little point of fact.
You had a lot of foresight there that it would affect cybersecurity back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Way out there. Yeah. So to summarize sort of what we're talking about here, we've gone through the details of an RFP, and it shows just how you can tell what's required, how it's required. And I recommend that MSPs get familiar with reading these things under non-disclosure. They will have access, and they should ask for at least one copy and go through it and just see the extent and what's covered. And this will be the guarantee that they have to do a level 1, level 2, maybe even level 3, depending on what's in the contract. If it was an ITAR contract, an international trade in arms, there would be a glossary of terms of material types that would be included there that they would have to use to label files and documents. And so it would be very clear. And I think as MSPs, we need to know about this stuff. We need to know how to look at it. It may drive the decisions we make on bringing on a new client, because we can't just automatically say, yeah, sure, we'll be your MSP. Well, we're not gonna sign up for all that security stuff. We're just gonna keep doing what we're doing. Okay, time out. We don't need those kinds of clients. I'm sorry.
Right.
And I've got a friend who actually supports your kind of client.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like as a builder, you know, if what you're great at building is bridges, you don't try to bid on a deal that's going to have to deal with buildings, right? And so what ends up happening is you've got to know what you're good at. You got to know what you're comfortable with, and you got to know what your clients are doing so that you can feel comfortable that you can appropriately support them, because you don't want to find out midway through an engagement with them that you're a square peg and they're a round hole. Right. That's a bad day.
Yeah,
that is
for everybody.
Yeah, and just
but
just
it's going to happen. Sadly, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it is. Just to add to that a little bit too, that I mean, it's not just, we talked about the FAR and DFARS clauses, right? Security requirements show up in other places in the contract as well. It might be in the statement of work. It might be in other places in the contract that they have additional requirements. It's important that the MSPs know that and know to ask their clients more than just, do you have the DFARS 7012 clause? Because they might have other additional requirements, and they might be just expecting that the MSP is providing those services that they may not even, if they don't know what they are, they can't provide them. So.
Yeah, it could be 853, could be some version of that, could be some level, could be any number of things. And I've had clients come back and say, well, I thought you were doing this already. And it's like,
right.
We need to have another conversation.
Like for us, like we have no desire to do level 3. If you happen to bring on a client and all of a sudden they decide that's the kind of work they're going after,
right.
Then you're going to have to make a choice. You either have to step up to level 3 to match them, or you got to exit stage right. Or at least they'll have to find somebody else that can do that contract support with you.
Yep. Better to know before you get engaged than finding out later, because it is trouble.
Well, and I think it's important as an MSP and MSSP, as well as an OSC, like be involved in the community, get to know and be part of others. Brian, you've got a good organization that can help MSPs start to try to understand some of these types of challenges.
Yeah. So the MSP Cybersecurity Exchange is really trying to do exactly that. It's trying to bring those folks that are cybersecurity compliance professionals together with the community of MSPs and work through these challenges, right? Work through, what does this mean? What does all this stuff mean to me? And how do we navigate these challenges with respect to our clients? So it's really, like I said, the boots on the ground. We're trying to help the MSP community who are struggling to implement these cybersecurity controls and understand really what they mean. So we're working at that level in the MSP Cyber Acts. Happy to have you two gentlemen on the steering committee for that to help me make sure we stay on the right mark with MSPs, and I think that's critically important. This is an MSP-driven community, but informed with cybersecurity compliance professionals.
Well, Shel, Brian, thank you so much for joining me today and going over this really topic that I haven't seen covered in much detail to the level that Shel, thank you so much for kind of organizing and getting just a regular RFP to go through and help people kind of see the type of questions and expectations. So thank you both so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Well, again, we'll be sharing some of those resources that you might be able to go shoulder to shoulder with other organizations and learn more about it. And so again, thank you so much for joining us on this great topic. And as always, keep on climbing, and we'll see you next time.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.